I came to Columbia bright-eyed, as all students do. I spent my time studying and hanging with friends. I even joined the African Students Association, just to feel closer to home. But as fall turned to winter, and winter gave way to spring, and spring edged into an institution I no longer recognized, I started to understand what it really meant to be African at this university, that my presence, my body, and my voice were already political. To claim the light. African students and the politics of presence.
Black scholars hear the call to equal opportunity in darkness. They must remember that they do not belong in the darkness of an American culture that refuses to move toward the light. They are not meant to be pliant captives and agents of institutions that deny light all over the world. No, they must speak the truth to themselves and to the community and to all who invite them into the new darkness. They must affirm the light movement of their past, the light movement of their people. They must affirm their capacities to move forward toward new alternatives for light in America.
That quote stayed with me because that's the tension between being invited into elite institutions and choosing whether to speak softly inside them or shake the walls. But how do you move toward the light when the institution around you is built to obscure it? When the walls you walk through were never meant to hold your voice? I knew I wasn't the first to feel this, so I went looking. I wanted to know the roots of my place. To understand what it meant to stand where I stand now, I had to look back at those who came before me. I mean, they don't call Columbia the protest ivy for no reason. When I began researching, I found flyers, newsletters, and photographs from the African Students Association in the 1980s and 90s. They hosted liberation film screenings with Teachers College, organized teach-ins with the Institute of African Studies, and invited ambassadors from the Organization of African Unity to speak at their graduation. They even participated in a hunger strike to protest the Ethiopian military's assault on civilians in Eritrea. These weren't just social or cultural events. They were acts of citizenship, public, intentional, and deeply African. Former Columbia student Leon Denmark, and a member of the Afro-American Society in the 1960s, said,
"Because we lived in a period of protest. The society was more open to protests. You know, it had been used to 1958. There had been protests, especially black people protesting.
They were aligning themselves with global liberation, including anti-apartheid movements.
You guys don't live in a period where society welcomes protests. Okay, so actually, hats off to you for doing it anyway."
In 2024, Columbia's African Student Association hosted teach-ins on Palestine. Legacy didn't begin or end with Columbia, however. Almost 40 years earlier in London, West African students were doing the same. The West African Students Union, WASU, was founded in 1925 by Ladipo Solanke. Its journal, WASU, meant to preach in Yoruba. They created housing for Black students denied accommodations, built Pan-African political consciousness, and laid the groundwork for post-colonial African governance.
The state of African Americans got better once the African countries started fighting for independence. If we're going to figure out how to do that, it has to come from you guys, personally and then as a group.
Like those in 1968, we know that internationalism has always been essential to Pan-Africanism, and our organization will lead us to collective liberation. Frederick Cooper reminds us that citizenship is not granted, it is claimed. And through these flyers, these dinners, these demands, students were doing just that. And this isn't only in the diaspora. On the continent, student movements shape history too. At the University of Ibadan, at Makerere, and in Nairobi, students protested structural adjustment, colonial curriculums, and authoritarian regimes. In Nigeria, one of the most iconic student formations was the Pirates Confraternity, founded in 1952 by Wole Soyinka and others. They used performance, satire, and met with each other to critique oppression. And so what began as a fraternity became a statement of youth dissent. The Pirates Confraternity may have started as just a group, but it eventually set a model for how African students turn institutions into sites of resistance. That model didn't disappear. It transformed and spread. They carry the same urgency I found in the archives. They speak the same political language, only now in a new generation's dialect. In 2000, the United Nations honored African student and youth organizations for advancing literacy, gender equity, and peace building.
Student organizations remain at the center of youth development and democratic accountability across Africa.
Organizations like the National African Student Association and All African Students Union are still fighting for education that reflects African realities, for equal and equitable access. The All African Students Union, founded in 1972 at a student congress in Kumasi, Ghana, helped draft the UN's action plan. These weren't just student groups. They were, and still are, political infrastructure.
Students are not merely political participants, they are catalysts. Their activism often prefigures broader social shifts.
It was almost eerie to me, seeing the parallels between African student protests on the continent and the protests erupting on our own campus. You can't even research the former without being led directly into the latter. Students facing overly violent police, students reading manifestos and collectively gathering, students refusing to be silent. It didn't just happen through protests in the streets. It happened in the arts too. In Kenya, students used performance to challenge the state until the government cracked down on their school plays, sending tear gas into a theater. That's why when I returned to the earliest Columbia archives, I wasn't surprised to find this written in the founding purpose of ASA.
Second, to provide a forum for the advancement of general African interest, political, economic, social, and cultural.
Cultural claims to citizenship are just as effective as political ones, and they mean and define each other in many ways. Students use political activism as well as social gatherings, as well as art and literature and media to find a place and advance belonging. But this wasn't just about belonging. This was about what it meant to be an African student, was about citizenship and claiming a right to be seen, to speak, and to shape the world we live in. There's a myth that student politics only looks like protest, but I've seen how culture becomes strategy. The annual African Culture Nights weren't just showcases. They were resistance, coded in song, dance, and storytelling. Into this year, where the Columbia African Students Association still hosts the yearly Afropolitan and bi-yearly political roundtables, we see that culture is not neutral. It is survival. It is strategy, and it endures.
As long as part of that people keeps its culture alive, a foreign power can never be sure of its domination.
But be whatever you're going to be. Maybe you're going to be a king. Maybe you're going to be a Gandhi. Maybe you're going to be a Mother Teresa. Whatever. Maybe you're going to be a Gloria Steinem. But create a moral standard for yourself, and then create a vision for yourself and follow it.
Student organizations remain at the center of youth development and democratic accountability across Africa. Students are not merely political participants, they are catalysts. Their activism often prefigures broader social shifts. As long as part of that people keeps its culture alive, a foreign power can never be sure of its domination.